So I found €500,000 completely destroyed in my grandfather's attic, and what I discovered about why he did it changed everything I thought I knew about money. My name is Lucas, and 3 months ago, my grandfather passed away. He left me his house, which honestly wasn't much, just an old place on the edge of town that nobody had lived in for years. The roof leaked, the walls had cracks, and there was this musty smell that hit you the second you walked through the door. I wasn't planning on keeping it. My plan was simple: clean it out, sell it, move on. But life has this funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a Tuesday morning when I climbed up into the attic. The ladder was old and shaky, and I remember thinking this was probably a bad idea. But I needed to check what was up there before putting the house on the market. Make sure there weren't any major problems hiding where nobody could see them. The attic was dark, really dark. Even with my flashlight, I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. There were boxes everywhere. Old furniture covered in dust, random junk that had been sitting there for who knows how long. I started moving things around, looking for anything valuable or important. That's when I saw it. A black duffel bag, shoved in the corner behind an old dresser. It was the kind of bag you'd take to the gym, nothing special about it, but something made me pull it out. Maybe it was just curiosity. Maybe it was something else. I unzipped the bag and my heart stopped. Money. Stacks and stacks of euro bills. But they weren't normal. Every single bill had been burned, not completely destroyed, but damaged enough that you could tell someone had done this on purpose. The edges were black and crispy. Some bills were stuck together. Others were torn and falling apart. I pulled out one of the stacks and looked at it closely. 500 euro notes, the purple ones, and there were hundreds of them in this bag. My hands were shaking as I tried to count. Rough estimate? Around €500,000, just sitting there in my dead grandfather's attic, completely ruined. My first thought was that this had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe there was a fire nobody told me about. Maybe my grandfather was hiding this money and something went wrong. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized this wasn't an accident. The burns were too controlled, too precise. Someone had carefully damaged each bill just enough to make it worthless, but not enough to completely destroy it. And when I dug deeper into the bag, I found something else. A notebook. It was small, bound in leather, and filled with my grandfather's handwriting. Page after page of notes, dates, numbers. At first, it didn't make any sense, but as I started reading, I realized I had stumbled onto something way bigger than I could have imagined. My grandfather wasn't just some old man who lived alone and kept to himself. He had been tracking something about the euro currency that most people don't know about, something that made him so angry, so disturbed, that he decided to destroy his own money rather than use it. Let me explain what I found. You see, most people think money is just money. You earn it, you spend it, end of story. But the truth is way more complicated than that. And the 500 euro note, it has a history that's darker than anything I could have imagined. The 500 euro note was introduced in 2002 when the euro currency first launched. It was the highest denomination note in the eurozone. On paper, it was supposed to make large transactions easier. If you needed to move a lot of cash, you could do it with fewer bills. Makes sense, right? But here's the problem. Almost immediately, the 500 euro note became the favorite currency of criminals. Drug dealers loved it. Human traffickers used it. Money launderers preferred it over anything else. Why? Because you could move massive amounts of money in a very small space. Think about it. 1 million euros in 500 euro bills weighs about 2 kilograms and fits easily in a backpack. The same amount in 50 euro bills weighs about 20 kilograms. If you're trying to smuggle money across borders or hide cash from authorities, which one are you going to choose? Law enforcement agencies started calling it the Bin Laden note because it was so popular with terrorists and organized crime groups. Studies showed that a huge percentage of 500 euro notes were being used for illegal activities. Some estimates said it was as high as 30% of all the bills in circulation. And here's where it gets really dark.
My grandfather's notebook explained all of this in detail, but it went deeper. He had been researching the connection between these bills and human trafficking networks operating across Europe. Page after page of notes about how these bills were used to buy and sell people, children, women, men, enslaved and traded like products. He wrote about how the European Central Bank knew about this problem for years, but didn't do anything. They kept printing these bills, even though everyone knew what they were being used for. The money was just too good. The profit was too high. Nobody wanted to stop the printing press. Reading his words, I could feel his anger coming through the pages. This wasn't just research. This was personal. He had discovered something that made him physically sick, something that made him look at money differently. In one entry, dated about 5 years ago, he wrote something that stuck with me. Every bill in my wallet could have blood on it. Every transaction I make could be supporting the worst crimes humanity is capable of. How am I supposed to live with that? That's when I understood why he burned the money. It wasn't about the value. It wasn't about being crazy or wasteful. It was a protest, a personal act of rebellion against a system he couldn't change. He had saved up all these 500 euro notes over the years, and when he finally understood what they represented, he couldn't bring himself to spend them. But he also couldn't just throw them away, so he burned them, carefully, deliberately, making them worthless. I kept reading through the notebook and found more disturbing information. My grandfather had tracked the serial numbers on some of his bills. He cross-referenced them with police reports and news articles about crimes in our region, and he found matches. Some of the bills he had received as payment for work he had done decades ago had later turned up in criminal investigations. His money had been part of the cycle.
This messed with my head. Because if his money was connected to crimes, what about mine? What about the bills in my wallet right now? How many hands had they passed through? What had they been used for before they reached me? The European Central Bank finally stopped producing 500 euro notes in 2019. They said it was to fight crime and corruption, but the bills that already existed are still legal tender. You can still use them. There are still billions of euros worth of these notes out there somewhere, in safes, in mattresses, in the hands of people doing things we don't want to think about. My grandfather's last entry in the notebook was dated 2 weeks before he died. I can't change the system. I can't stop what's happening, but I can refuse to participate. Let this money burn. Let it be a reminder that some things are worth more than currency. I sat in that attic for hours holding that burned money and reading his words over and over. Part of me wanted to believe he was just paranoid, just an old man who got too deep into conspiracy theories and lost perspective. But the evidence was all there. The connections were real. The crimes were real. And then I started thinking about something else. If the 500 euro note was this bad, what about other currencies? What about the $100 bill? What about cryptocurrency? Every form of money can be used for good or bad. The tool isn't the problem. The problem is what we choose to do with it. But some tools make it easier to do bad things. And when governments and banks keep those tools in circulation even after they know the damage they cause, what does that say about priorities? I decided to do some more research on my own. I wanted to know if my grandfather was right, if this was really as big of a problem as he thought. What I found shocked me. There have been multiple studies done on high-denomination banknotes and their connection to crime. One report by Harvard economist Kenneth Rogoff argued that large bills should be eliminated entirely because they facilitate tax evasion and crime. Another study found that in countries where high-value notes were removed from circulation, certain types of crime actually decreased. But here's the thing that really got me. The financial industry fought back hard against these proposals. Banks didn't want to lose the convenience of high-value notes. Wealthy people didn't want their cash holdings to become bulkier and harder to store, and governments were worried about the economic disruption it might cause. So the 500 euro note got phased out eventually, but it took way longer than it should have. And in the meantime, countless crimes were committed using that currency. Lives were destroyed, people were trafficked, drugs were sold, weapons were bought, all facilitated by purple pieces of paper with numbers printed on them. My grandfather saw all of this and couldn't handle it. He felt complicit. He felt guilty. So he took the most extreme action he could think of. He destroyed his own wealth rather than contribute to the system. Now I'm sitting here with this bag of burned money and I have to decide what to do with it. Part of me wants to take it to a bank and see if they can replace any of it. Technically, if more than 50% of a bill is intact, you can exchange it for a new one. I could probably recover some of this money, maybe not all of it, but enough to make a difference in my life. But doing that feels like betraying everything my grandfather stood for. It feels like saying his protest didn't matter, like saying I don't care about the same things he cared about. On the other hand, leaving this money destroyed doesn't change anything. The system is still there. The crimes are still happening. Burning money doesn't save anyone. It doesn't fix anything. It's just a symbolic gesture that nobody except me will ever know about. I've been thinking about this for weeks now, and I still don't have an answer. What I do know is that my grandfather's obsession with this issue taught me something important. Money isn't neutral. It's not just a tool we use to buy things. It's connected to everything, to power, to crime, to suffering, to hope. Every transaction we make is part of a bigger system, and that system has consequences.
Most of us don't think about where our money comes from or where it goes. We just use it. But maybe we should think about it more. Maybe we should ask harder questions about the currencies we use and the institutions that control them. I found one more thing in that attic, tucked into the back of the notebook. A letter, addressed to me. My grandfather must have known I'd be the one to find all of this eventually. He wrote it a few months before he died. His handwriting was shaky, but the message was clear. He said he didn't burn the money because he thought it would change the world. He burned it because he needed to change himself. He needed to draw a line, to say that some things matter more than money. And he hoped that whoever found his stash would understand why he did it. He also said something that's been stuck in my head ever since I read it. Money is a mirror. It reflects who we are and what we value, and sometimes what it shows us is too ugly to accept. I still have that bag of burned euros. It's in my apartment now, hidden in my closet. I haven't decided what to do with it. Maybe I never will. But I think about my grandfather every day, about the choice he made, about what it means to stand up for something even when nobody's watching, even when it costs you everything. The 500 euro note is mostly gone now, but the problems it represented are still here. The trafficking, the corruption, the crime, all of it is still happening, just using different tools, different currencies, different methods. And maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. It's not about the money. It's never really about the money. It's about what we're willing to ignore, what we're willing to accept, what we're willing to do when we discover something's wrong. My grandfather chose to burn his money. You might think that's crazy. You might think it was a waste. But for him, it was the only choice that made sense, the only way he could live with himself. I don't know what I'm going to do with the money in my closet, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never look at currency the same way again. Click the next video to see what I discovered about my grandfather's past that explains why this affected him so deeply.